Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So we're going to do a little roundtable, and I'll introduce everybody. So we have Laura Rutan, Jared Karoff, and Bryce Carter. Now, we'll go through individually, and each person can introduce themselves, because you all have way too long of a list for me to rattle off. So, ladies first. Lauren, do you want to go first?
Sure. Oh, I started in college cheerleading, cheered all through college. After that, I got into fitness competitions. After that, I moved on to figure and then got into CrossFit. I have competed regionally as an individual and on a team in CrossFit. After CrossFit, I got into Olympic weightlifting. And after Olympic weightlifting, that took me into powerlifting. I moved to South Carolina for Olympic weightlifting. I had made the junior Olympic team on muscle driver. And through that is where I found powerlifting and where I met Rob. I grew up in Ohio, moved to South Carolina in 2015, met Rob, I think 2015, like the late end of the year. And then I found the love for powerlifting. So I've been powerlifting since 2015, so 10 years. I was on the world team in 2017 and had some more kids in between there, and then got back into powerlifting. So I've been, my first competition after my last child was 23, December 23. So been a little over a year since I've been back. But yeah, I own a gym in Canton, Ohio, Rutan Athletic Club. Besides that, I have 6 children. That keeps me a little busy. Yeah, I personally train people on the side. I have a real job. I am a finance and payroll administrator for a company out of Columbus, Ohio.
And then, what weight class do you have elite tables in?
I have a couple, 123, 132, and 148.
Yes, and then there was an old class that doesn't exist anymore. That
Yeah,
we totally.
50, so 128.
Yeah, so you've been heavy and light and all the fun in between.
Yeah, like 20 pounds.
Yeah, quite a big jump at that body weight. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. Jared, do you want to go next?
I'm Jared Karoff. So I guess where do we want to start? I've been around strength training like my whole life because my dad used to compete in powerlifting back when like equipped lifting was like the big thing. So he used to just take me training with him, and that's kind of where my love for everything started. I didn't really get started until I was in graduate school. So I, was in physical therapy school down at Wingate University right outside of Charlotte. I'm from up near Pittsburgh, PA, and that's where I live now. And I was bored and needed something to do to keep me occupied when I was in graduate school. So I figured I'd give powerlifting a shot. So I signed up for a meet. I didn't train for it. I tested my maxes 2 weeks out from the meet, showed up to the meet. It was in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was they have like a fairgrounds there, and ended up falling in love with it from there. And while I was like down at school there, my dad was like, "Hey, do you remember Betty Polenic, your daycare teacher?" And I was like, "Yeah, I remember Betty." My dad goes, her son Rob owns a gym down there and he coaches powerlifting. You should reach out to him. And I was like, no way. So I followed Rob on Instagram. I was like, oh, sweet. His stuff's pretty cool. And then I reached out to him, and that was in 2015 or 2016?
Yeah, we got around that.
Yeah, so that's how we got started, and we've been rolling ever since. I've gotten a lot stronger since then.
You're crazy.
Well, thank you. So I finished graduate school. I am a doctor of physical therapy. My first job out of school, I ran an outpatient clinic for 3.5 years, and then I transitioned to home health. I got tired of, working in the outpatient, patient meal type clinic. Started home health, and then I had an opportunity here at Union Fitness, where it's the gym that I train at, and I've been here since 2019. I had the opportunity to start my own business here. So I started Function Reforged Physical Therapy. So I rent a space out of the gym and operate my own physical therapy practice here, where I specialize in working with barbell athletes, runners, and ball sport athletes. So yeah, that's where I'm at there.
Awesome. Yes. And then, Bryce, you want to go through your background?
Sure, yeah. I'm Bryce Carter. Yeah. Where do I start? I guess I grew up playing sports through all of my childhood, through high school. I was playing football and lacrosse towards the end. Once I got into college, I gained a little bit more than the freshman 15 and got a little too big. And that's what started to motivate me to get into fitness a little bit more. So yeah, I dropped 70 pounds from my heaviest just on my own. Got really into sort of more like the bodybuilding side of just lifting. I had no clue what I was doing, really. And so, yeah, eventually I got down to 200 pounds. I felt like I was too small. So, and I was like, all right, let's get strong. And then squat was always my favorite lift. I started looking up, strength programs, how to get stronger, ran a bunch of different stuff, like 5-3-1. I freaking loved. Eventually in college, I met a friend, name is Harrigan, super strong. I think he's got 1850 total, who competed in powerlifting. And, that eventually convinced me to start competing. So that's kind of how I got into powerlifting and into fitness. So I guess more of my background, I'm actually an electrical engineer, and I went to Clemson University. Learned a lot of what I know just from personal experience and self-research, working with other coaches online and in person. Yeah, so I guess my accomplishments, I've got a state squat record in USPA, 617 pounds as a junior, 325-pound bench, and a 661 deadlift. As a coach, my best accomplishment is I coached a lifter to world championships in WPC, where he holds 4 world records. So feel pretty good about that. Anyway, I met Rob when I graduated from Clemson, and I was looking for a new gym, and Brutal Iron was the best looking one at the time. And eventually I hired him, and things have been great ever since. I'm stronger than ever, leaner than ever, and since then it's been great. Getting stronger, having fun.
And you have 2 weeks coming up next month.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I'm 4 weeks out from mine. And again, I think Rob knows better than anybody. I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I'm very happy for you, man. Your body's in a good place right now. Yes.
Absolutely.
And then my background, usually everybody's listening to the podcast there now. So, but, geez, it's always funny. I think we all said where do we start because it's a lot to unpack. But I was like skinny fat kid, no muscle, hated myself when I was a teenager. Just wanted to learn everything I could to try to get myself better. As I was excited about things, I wanted to share it with friends. And then all my friends started getting great results, and it was addicting to see that. So I got into coaching and training people when I was, I think, like 16. And then I started doing it for side money when I was 18. I got a undergrad in health and phys ed, master's in nutrition, personal training certification, corrective exercise specialist certification, tactical fitness, and running. So yes, even a running coach certification. And just trained a lot of people since then. Been 3,000 plus clients. I taught at the university level for 7 years, teaching exercise physiology and weight training, and 500 plus students and all that fun stuff. And you 3 are great examples of the fun I've been able to have. What I think is hilarious is I am the least accomplished lifter among the 4 of us. So, congratulations to all of you. That's some work to do to catch up. So, before we started, we had talked about the idea of getting topics in mind. I figured I would go ahead and start first, because no one wants to ever be the first person. So I'll throw something out there, and we'll talk a little bit, and then we can kind of all go around and present a topic as we go. So, topic that I usually see trainers and or clients miss is the distinction of the recovery difference between muscle tissue and connective tissue. So what tends to happen is people train the frequency, intensity, and volume of their muscles, but end up burying their CNS, and then they run into connective tissue issues. Because typically the muscles can respond and recover a lot faster. I mean, you talk about less than 7 days. You do a really aggressive squat session, and for most people at most strength levels can be recovered and do that again in 7 days. Whereas CNS is connected with quality, nutrition, life stress, and all these other things. They do a 10 out of 10 RPE on a lift. It might, for some people, take 2, 3, 4 weeks to be able to give that level of effort again. And then with the heaviness of lifting, say if somebody's lifting 90% plus, there's going to be connective tissue stress that is challenging because we don't often feel that right away. We don't feel it until it becomes a problem. Like, oh man, the elbow's been hurting me or my shoulder's been bugging me. It's a slow build up, but then once you notice it, unfortunately, it's a really slow fix. So when you guys do programming, this is a loaded question. You had no time to prep for this. Is there any thought to how you balance the recovery of those in how heavy you lift on the big lifts versus how intense and the volume you use on accessories?
Yeah, I can kick this off if you want, because this is, half the reason I see clients, honestly, is, they've been training for a while. Obviously, something gets irritated, and then they got to come over to see me to get those things feeling better, right? So I think, a lot of times, what happens is the client doesn't do a good job communicating with the coach initially as to like how the body's feeling, right? So they just want to like lift heavy. They want to keep progressing their lifts. The coach, they just keep saying, oh, I feel good. I feel good. And then they're just doing whatever the program says until something goes awry, right? So the coach doesn't know, like, because the client could be moving pretty well. There's not really necessarily any tells sometimes until it's a little too late. Next thing you know, like, they have some patellar tendonitis or some elbow tendonitis or rotator cuff tendonitis, whatever it is. So I do a lot of education with my clients on, like kind of the telltales with their body as to like how things are feeling.
Yeah, I think this comes to like maturity in the sport, like knowing your body, knowing like when you feel something to stop or not. Because that's what, I coach right now a group of 25 people at our gym, first year lifters, like never have done anything like this before. And it's funny because I never realized like even the knowledge behind working out period and then programming, and like they have no idea whatsoever. And you would think it would be common sense, but we've done this for 20 some years. But it really like makes it pop out to me because not everybody knows this stuff, and nobody even has awareness of their body. And it's just crazy. But I think a lot of that has to do with like maturity in the sport and feeling your body and knowing what's too much and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, like, Bryce, when you do your programming, you have the client who has that world record level strength. And the stronger someone is, more the big lifts are going to cause havoc and chaos. Do you do anything specific for them versus like a beginner client in regards to how often you lift heavy or any kind of like extra care or therapies you do?
Yeah. So for one, I think it comes down to the individual first and their mental, how they approach their lifting, because I like to use RPE and RIR, so rating of perceived exertion and reps in reserve for lifts pretty regularly, and how well that lifter self-regulates and can adhere to that intensity will change how I manage that program for that lifter. So this client in particular, he is one to ego lift sometimes, so it's a little tough writing programs. So one thing I'll do for people like him who maybe look at the weight a little bit more than the quality of the set or whatever my intention was, is to give them an intensity range but also a weight range, and to tell them not to exceed that amount of weight, because they can listen to their body, but they don't know when to stop pushing. That's one thing I kind of look at in regards to intensity and regulating that. So with him, yeah, he's a 165, so he's a lighter weight guy, and he pulls sumo, and he's a wide grip bencher. So those are two things that are more prone to injury, I guess you could say, on the powerlifting side of things. So I'm pretty careful with exercise selection and rep ranges on assistant movements to help support his bench and his deadlift. So anyway, Yeah, it's interesting on a person to person basis how you want to approach it. And as a beginner, it's really I also have a very new to powerlifting client as well. And part of it is just getting a feel for how responsible they will be with the program you
Yeah.
write. And how you go from there kind of depends on how they react. But I like to use variations of the main lifts as well to manage load because you can't push many of them much heavier than your competition lifts. So those are some of my strategies I've used and have worked so far with my stronger versus my starting out sort of level client.
And I think, like, for me, one of the things, one large one that I'll manipulate is the eccentric load on accessories. So when I have a client who's super strong, especially like fast twitch, like really explosive person, I tend to pull back on the heaviness of the eccentric movement, which is when the loaded muscle is extending under weight load. So I tend to do less volume and heaviness of eccentric loads on their accessories because the main lift, exception of a deadlift, the bench press has an eccentric, the squat has a very demanding eccentric. So the stronger they are, the more they're getting eccentric muscular and connective tissue stress in their main lift, therefore they need less of that from their accessories. However, when somebody's weaker, I tend to just drive the eccentric load super high because their demand created by the main lift is so low, especially if their technique is not very proficient. They're going to need a lot of technique work, but to do a technique properly, they're having to lift light. But then if it's light, they don't get the muscle tissue stress. So I then usually modify the eccentric load for them to be super high. And that is, in part, one of the connections I found to where having a varied background of knowledge and experience is super helpful in strength training. So knowing, like, I prep people for bodybuilding shows and knowing how much tissue stress the body can handle in relation to growth and bodybuilding actually has allowed me to better program accessory work for powerlifters because for a lot of powerlifters, their accessory work is bodybuilding. They need more tissue in certain areas. And bodybuilding is exactly that. If you want to build the outer pec versus the inner pec, or, this muscle versus that muscle, the quad sweep versus the teardrop, all what bodybuilding is. And in powerlifting, a lot of times I've ran into coaches or people who think, if you want to get better squats, just squat. And I'm like, I'm a big fan of that. It works for some, but I've seen it not work for many more. To where I feel like pinpointing accessories and controlling eccentric loads is a really good way to modify the tissue versus CNS versus connective tissue kind of stress levels.
I think kind of like following that up a little bit, and I'm going to say something and kind of lead into a question. But so like when I get like younger lifters or newer lifters, a lot of times when I'm doing programming, I think it's really important to build up connective tissue strength, right? Like the capacity of the tendons and the ligaments. So I like to prescribe a lot of like loaded eccentric movements and then plyometrics and then even like heavy isometrics for building tendon strength in just newer lifters to just help, like if we can build that up early and keep that in for a while, like down the road when we're actually having to handle heavier weights, the likelihood, at least my thought process, the likelihood of getting things like tendonitis and different things is a little lower. I've also found that with a lot of mature lifters or people who've been around the block a while, like they do have a lot of built up connective tissue strength, but sometimes they haven't done enough to where like they just get chronic tendonitis type issues. And it's almost like backtracking to try to build that back up again to get them healthy. What do you guys do specifically for your clients, both younger and mature, for building like connective tissue strength and trying to keep them healthy through like training blocks?
I mean, I just use a lot of accessory, like high rep type stuff after the main lifts. And I feel like female and male are a lot different as well. But yeah, high rep blood flow to the area and keep it strong and yeah.
Yeah, and I know like you guys are used to my programming, but almost always to start the workout, we have some type of static and or dynamic type tissue preparation. And then there's usually some annoying thing I make you do where it's like a glute bridge or an adductor hold or some other craziness. So I just call it movement prep. Is I do a lot of small isolative movements before the main lift because a couple things is I find that people perform better in the main lift if you have them do something a little bit painful and miserable before they get there, because it improves production of like adrenaline and endorphins. So the adrenaline starts to produce more. That's more aggression, more focus. Endorphins is natural painkillers. So they tend to perform better in the main lift if they've done something before the main lift that they went like, oh, that kind of sucked. That was really hard. So has some degree of challenge. And then if I want them to, say, build up strength in their adductors, getting an isolated movement very helpful because they could just squat, but all the other bigger, stronger muscles are going to take over. Adductor only gets worked once everything else is dead. So I don't want to have to kill everything else to get to it. And I find that at the end of the workout, after people do the main lift, they usually feel like crap and they're tired and they give things like half-assed effort, especially if it's something that they don't actually like. So I find that starting the workout with small pinpointed isometrics or isolation type movements, like one example is just having somebody do like an adductor slide, they put a 25-pound plate in the ground and then just kind of kick it back and forth and that'll burn up your groin really well. They don't like doing that at the end of the workout. They're not going to do that when you're tired. They're going to skip that stuff. But if they have to do that to get to the fun stuff,
The people who skip don't get better.
That's great.
I can't lift without doing that stuff now.
Yes, it becomes addicting.
Right. You don't feel like a weight.
Bryce, did you want to come in on that topic?
Yeah, I kind of picked up from what Rob has been doing for me a little bit with the movement prep. I kind of like to push the connective tissues in movement prep a little bit, especially for my lifters that do these higher risk variations of the power lifts, because I am strictly a powerlifting coach. So really, opening up that pec tendon, the adductors, I mean, those are just the two that come to mind immediately. I keep mentioning them. So something like a McLeod fly, where I'm really pushing that external rotation at the shoulder, or, these side planks that freaking Rob gives me that I hate, but they work very well. Those are just some good examples of things I'll give to clients to not only get them warmed up, but help with the connective tissue strength. And then after their main movements, I like to give assisted movements that challenge those connective tissues in positions they wouldn't be in their main lifts. So like a conventional puller, I might push them a higher rep range on like a sumo belt squat to, attack those like adductor weaknesses. And, it's just not something they'd normally be exposed to. And a higher rep range, kind of like Lauren was saying. But also I'll do it with smaller isolation sort of exercises, like Copenhagen planks, stuff like that. Again, in higher rep range and maybe not so high intensity all the time. But again, it's at the end of the workout, kind of like Rob was saying, how much effort do they have left to give? Probably enough to achieve the intention of what I programmed.
And then to jump on that real quick is one fun thing is you all have heard of Louis Simmons. Any listener who is not, please go listen to everything he's ever said. But one of the things I picked up from him was that to build connective tissue, yes, really heavy weights and isometric holds are helpful, but also really high rep, really long, like very high time under tension can be helpful. I had a client once who had a connective tissue disease. And
Yeah, I heard of. I just read about that like last month.
Okay, so he had a disease, and it was actually hereditary. His sister had it as well. And he used to lift crazy heavy when he was younger, 700 plus pound squat and deadlift, 500 plus bench. But he tore his pec, and then he tore a quad, and then it was like everything started happening, and he's like, what the heck's going on? So he eventually found out that was what he had. He was going to UNC Chapel Hill down here in the Carolinas, and he was a member of the gym, and he ended up asking me, he's like, hey, you seem to work with people. Do you know anything about connective tissue? And I was like, hell yeah, of course. So we tried a whole bunch of stuff, and I had him doing pec flies on our free motion, like chest fly machine. And we would actually do 3 to 5 minute sets. So he never released tension for 3 to 5 minutes. And we were doing a bunch of tissues that we could get to with isolation movements. And he was being researched at UNC Chapel Hill and actually showed that we were able to reverse the degradation of the connective tissue. We were actually able to build the connective tissue, even in spite of that disease. So what's interesting to hear, Bryce, and what I like to hear, like that's neat that you said it, was that high reps and high duration can actually be as helpful as really heavy loads. And sometimes being able to utilize high reps is great to balance the stress of the heavy loads that we're already getting in like squat, bench, deadlift.
Do you guys like going more off of, or what do you see more beneficial, like when you're programming things for clients as far as like rep schemes or time under tension?
But I'd say I go more towards rep.
Yeah, I do rep ranges for clients because I find that it's easier for them to mentally manage that while they're doing the lift rather than trying to look at a clock or time something. But I do pick my rep ranges specific to how long I think it'll take them to do the movement. So for example, a half squat versus a bicep curl, like the set of 10 is not the same for both of those movements. So if I want like a heavy stimulus for half squats, I might have them do 4 to 8 reps. But like on a bicep curl, they might do 10 to 14. But I know that the time under tension is actually going to be relatively similar because one movement has a shorter movement pathway than the other. So I usually am taking care of the time under tension on my side of things, and all they see is the rep ranges. But I am accounting for time under tension.
I like that, Rob. That's something that I kind of do too, indirectly. I like to put these different kind of intensification, like, I don't know, different ways to intensify your exercises in my program. So a lot of like tempo work is one I really like. 1.5 reps, pauses, stuff like that. And that will increase that time under tension indirectly. And so that's something I think about on my side. I don't really tell my clients that, but it's a way for them to down regulate their load and, hopefully have less impact on their other lifts with recovery, that sort of stuff. So the rep ranges and rep schemes are what I go in thinking immediately. But usually there's some reason I want to increase that time under tension. So intensification things are something I like to program.
Yeah, I like to think about it as like time under tension when I'm doing things with whether they're like the athlete like that isn't injured or the injured athlete. But because everybody's so different with like one person might take, if I want them to be under load for let's say like 20 seconds or something, like one person there might be 5 reps, another might be like 10 just based on how they move.
Yeah.
And how big they are or, whatever it is that we're doing. But I know that like, you can kind of same like means to an end almost, you know what I mean? I was just curious how you guys like thought about it and thought about your programming with it.
Yeah, and I do that per client. So the way that I like to train people, this is a preference, doesn't mean it's right for everybody, and that's definitely not the message I want to send. But I'm fortunate that the style in which I get to work with people is one-on-one program. So everybody I work with, I know their name, I know how fast they move, I know everything about them. So if I want the same outcome across multiple people, I'll give different rep ranges to each client. So if I know one client is very slow, I might give them lower reps, where if I know another client who moves quickly, I might give them higher reps, and I know that across both of them, I'm going to get a similar outcome. Now, the person who moves slow, I'm trying to make them move faster, when that's appropriate. The person who moves too fast, I'm trying to get them to move slow when that's appropriate. So you're always working on proper tempo, but being able to do one-on-one based programming is nice because you are more able to control individual variances. Whereas when you do mass programming, if you write, okay, I want you to do RDLs for a set of 10 to 14 reps, you have no clue, like what speed that's going to be across, 50, 100, plus people. And that's where it's interesting because I've actually seen recent programming with like the current science culture. They're now saying that you can get muscular growth from really anything between, say, like 5 to 30 reps. So I'm seeing in the bodybuilding world, coaches are now programming, do this movement But if you do it between 5 to 20 reps, that's fine. Pick whatever's best for you. And I'm like, oh, I'm not a big fan of that. My experiences between 5 reps and 20 reps. You see people having awareness of individual differences, but maybe they don't know yet how to modify for that across mass programs.
It's crazy that is interesting because that research, like the research that you're talking about, the reason that they gave that range is because it's how close you take things to failure. And they found that if you take 5 reps pretty much to failure or 30 reps pretty much to failure, you can see a positive stimulus in muscle growth, like kind of on either end. So it's interesting when you're like, oh yeah, just do this for 5 reps, you'll see growth. And it's like, that's not the purpose of like what the study shows at all.
Yes. And that's actually, I did a podcast about that, about the differences in experiences and outcomes based on rep ranges. But it is interesting to see how people are trying to build in like research and science into programming. They're as if they're staying with research and up to date, and everything they do is fancy, so they include it to look good. But then there is like the genuine people who want things to be, as precise and correct as possible. What's interesting though is there's the large gap between what a research says versus what application would be. And a lot of times coaches are just experimenting to try to fill in that gap. And there's not really proven methods if something's only been around for a year or two as opposed to something that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years.
So I guess do you guys notice a difference in just set and rep scheme per client, like set and rep scheme differences for like different results per client? Like let's say you're working with power lifters. Do you see different results with like certain set and rep schemes for some clients versus others, like towards the same end, or is it pretty similar across the board?
I'll be interested in Rob's answer because he has such a wider base of clients.
I'll speak like from my experiences. It's a large range. So I have some clients that will, if I give them I want them to do, I'm just making up stuff. Say I want them to do 2 sets of 4 and then 2 sets of 2. They'll freak out because they're like, I only have 2 sets. Was this heavy enough to count it as the first of the 2 of the 4? Or do I need to go heavier there? So I talked to them and it turns out they did 8 sets trying to find the perfect 4. And I'm like,
oh yeah, that happens every day for me.
so I was like, oh, no.
I'm like, no.
And then the other example is if I gave somebody who's dialed in, very intense, and they tend to kind of push themselves a little more than they'd like, and I'm like, here's 4 sets. By the time they get to the 4th one, they're destroyed. Their technique is trash because they killed themselves in the first 2. So to me, what I tend to see is it's related to strength levels, it's related to fast twitch versus slow twitch, related to mindset and aggression, confidence. There's a lot of individual factors to where 2 sets of a heavyweight is plenty for some people, and other people I might have them do 6 or 8 sets because what they perceive to be heavy isn't actually heavy at all. They're just perceiving it to be heavy, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, looks like you tripled your reps there. It's not visible yet.
I'm not quite there.
Yes, but I do find across the people I get to work with it is quite what I would consider a large range. Is for example, Jared, you're crazy strong, so I have to be very careful in how many working sets I give you, because the first one you're going to give the best your body has. The second one, your body now has less. Whereas if I have somebody who's more of a beginner, the first one, they're going to do it, but they're going to leave a little under their toes. Or they're going to stop a little bit short of 8 RPE. Maybe they really only did 7. So it felt heavy, but it really wasn't because their technique was a little off. So then the second set, all of a sudden they have better balance and they look like they could have done 3 more reps. So then the third set, they go back to crappy technique, they die in the middle of it. It's so varied for some people, but for others, it's so dialed in that when I write the programming, I account for that. So one client's program is going to look completely different than another client's program due to that.
Gotcha.
I've noticed as I get closer to a meet for one of my clients, that's really when these differences matter more and how I apply them a little bit differently. So with my stronger guy, he's a little more aggressive. He's going to expend himself on that top set And if we take that same weight again, that next set, it's going to be way too hard for him. So for him, I might do something more often like a top set with back down sets, and keep that throughout prep. Whereas some of my guys who struggle finding the right intensity, kind of like you were saying, Rob, I might do ascending sets and keep that a little bit more through prep. And then I'll have times for descending or straight sets. But those are kind of the two extremes for me, the ascending versus the back down sets. And yeah, it really does come down to the individual lifter. And it's something I think you just have to trial and error with and see what works best for them.
Yeah. I think it's fun, like, the more people you get to work with. I guess, like, one thing I've found is the more people you get to work with, the more you realize the difference between memorization versus concepts. So a lot of times people think, like, oh, this is a formula. I should just apply this formula to everything I do or to every client I work with, or, like, this worked for so-and-so, so it's going to work for me. And the more and more people I work with, the less and less and less that's true. Is you have to find out why it worked for that person. And then you apply the why to each person you work with, not the how or the what of what they did.
So, kind of funny story, kind of going off this conversation too. I've actually regretted going off program a couple times when Rob will be like, oh, you're just going to do, 2 triples at whatever weight. And I'm like, nah, that's BS. I can do more than that. And then
That's Lauren's everyday life. Ask Rob.
so I do it, and then he'll be like, okay, that wasn't in the program, but, good on you for doing it. And then I will just fall apart for the rest of the week. It's like I had to deload every other lift for the rest of the week to get back on track. I'm like, oh, okay, there was a reason behind this.
Yeah. That is so true. Anytime you work, like you guys all know this, is there's a difference between the coach brain and the athlete brain.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I would be pissed at all my people if they did what I do.
100%, yeah. And that's the best part is, like, I know better, and I'm still just like, no. Like, the meathead turns on, and you're just like, all right.
What I love about it is what you guys wouldn't see is I do the same thing, but against myself. So I write my own programming, but then I argue against what I wrote based on how I felt that day. And then I'm like, you're just arguing with your own self. Like, this is so stupid. Yeah. And that's usually, going back to the first topic I brought up, was the connective tissue, CNS, and muscle tissue. The athlete is so attuned to how does the muscles feel, or how do the muscles feel. And if the muscles feel fresh, they're like, I'm great. And I'm like, no, because the CNS maybe not ready. You might be right on the edge of crashing. The connective tissue might not be ready. But they're not going to perceive that. I'm going to be able to see it, and you guys will see it in your client programming because you're looking at it from, like, the macro view. You're not in the experience, per lift, and it's like, oh, that one was smoke. I definitely have more. And you're like, well, you're supposed to be able to do that well right now, but we also want to be able to do something well tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. So it is hard to get the athlete brain to recognize the coach's more long-term and self-care viewpoints. Maybe a small muscle tear or some kind of strain. And I'm like, damn it. So that's why I decided to do that. That's why I wrote that. So the next time this comes up, let me know. Let myself know, basically. It's trial and error. And there's Stan Efferding said, I forget the exact quote, but it was something along the lines, is if you show me someone who's never had an injury, you're also showing me somebody who's never accomplished anything.
Right, yeah.
And his point is find out where the body breaks. Sometimes the body breaks. You never know where that is. You never know if you're getting the most of what you can get. The more driven people are, the more advanced the athlete, the stronger the person gets in strength-based training, the closer and closer and closer to that line they have this drive, this internal fire, like, I have to get every ounce I can possibly get. And that is understandable from a coach's point of view, but it also does create some of that conflict between this is what I think is best versus this is what the athlete thinks they can possibly get away with. So having that dance, I feel like, is an unavoidable part. And I would actually say it's actually a good thing, because if your client is never pushing that level, I would wonder, I don't know. It's kind of like, I would rather pull someone back than have to kick him in the ass and move him forward.
Yeah. I mean, I would even argue from my standpoint, just with seeing injured athletes and stuff, the people who know how to like push themselves and like really intensely, they tend to have like really good results when it comes to therapy and stuff, because one, their body's used to adapting to, really intense stimuli all the time, but also they have the mindset of like they're okay with a little bit of discomfort, right? So like my clients that come in that, because injuries just happen, whether you're training or not training, it doesn't matter, right? But my clients that come in that like, oh, I hurt my back squatting, but they don't know how to like push themselves to intensity. They're not ever okay with any level of discomfort. It's almost like teaching them like we have to be okay with a little bit of discomfort here as we recover and we rehab. Like that's part of it. You're hurt, And whereas like the athletes that are very comfortable with intensity and discomfort all the time, it's real easy to be like, okay, here's your threshold. You're allowed to stay around that threshold. You don't want to jump over it too much. And then next thing you know, it just starts to get better quickly because they can push themselves right to that threshold every time, like without question. Rehab is so much easier with people who understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a fun point that we could maybe all touch on is how would we address a client who needs to be able to develop their pain and misery tolerance versus a client that we need to actually pull back. Does have like methods or any strategies on either end of that?
Like really uncomfortable, like challenges almost for people where like I know it's just gonna be like it's not dangerous necessarily. Like something I'm not gonna give them something where they could potentially hurt themselves, but I'm gonna give them something where it's just gonna burn so bad that they're just miserable and they have to get through it. So they start to like they're just forced to lean into discomfort a little bit. That way, like as we start to progress through like our lifts and it is going to start to be uncomfortable, there's just a piece of their brain that knows like, okay, I've been here before. And we can even like, sometimes it's even helpful to have those conversations like, look, you did this, you did X. So just put yourself in that mindset for Y. Like, it's fine. You've been here. And then for the people that like to go a little too intensely, I think it's the inverse conversation. And also for me, it's a lot of conversation, but also just making sure we pull them back. Like Bryce had talked about, he gives his client like a top single and then gives them back down sets and stuff. Like I find that is extremely helpful. Like let them get it out on something and then like, let's pull it back. You're still going to have the intensity, but I know this isn't going to like murder you and we're screwed for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I do that a lot with like accessories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good strategy.
For clients that struggle to go hard enough, something I like to do is have them film particular movements and have them push to failure, especially heavier, like safe movements, like hack squats, for example. That's one, if you've ever taken like a set of 8 to failure, pretty heavy, it's the worst, but it's the best. So I really like to see them push and struggle towards the end, because that's something that you can carry over to your other lifts, other exercises, and really just other aspects of life, that something's going to suck. You're going to push through it. And when you're done, you'll feel really good about it. So that's one thing I'll do is really hard, heavy compounds to failure, where there's little risk, I guess, involved. Something else I like to do are various intensification methods, kind of like I mentioned earlier. Stuff like tempos, pauses, 1.5 reps, or stuff like rest, pause, and myo reps, because there is no like stuff with myo reps or rest, pause. You can give them something beyond like a rep range and just tell them, take it to failure, or you're going to go for this long, a minute. And that's going to force them to push. So those are a couple methods for people who struggle with pushing hard enough. And for those that need to scale back, harder variations of lifts. So I hate front squats, but when I did them, like it made me feel pretty honest. Rob destroyed me with those, and we took those out.
I like how you felt honest.
Yeah. Oh man, they're the worst.
It made me feel pretty honest.
I asked Rob to put them in my program.
I'm glad you can offload mine to you. So that's good. And something else I use is percentages for the main lifts. Sometimes when I use RPE or RAR, people will lie to themselves and say, this is easier than it was. And so when you use percentages, there's nothing else you can really do there. You're going to take it for this many reps at 80%, and you're going to send it, and we'll see how it looks. So those are just a couple methods I use.
Yeah. And then there was a conversation I actually had with somebody yesterday. Former military, I think that's the proper terminology. And they got into like strength-based training. And one of the things we were talking about was if like the same thing shouldn't hurt all the time. And what we meant was connective tissue or like a joint. Like if their elbow is always bothering them, then something is wrong. But if your elbow bothers you for like 2 or 3 days, and then it doesn't flare up again, then we're probably on the edge of what we should be doing. And maybe they're pushing a smidge too hard. But that's a marker for them that we are implementing now is if the same thing continues to hurt like week after week after week, you're doing too much for that thing. Now, avoid all joint pain, all joint stress, and nothing ever hurts. Well, then you're going too far on the other side. Is are you really pushing your body hard enough? So I think the presence of some type of muscular or joint annoyance from time to time isn't the end of the world, but it should be the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah, so at Union Fitness here, I coach their powerful class. It's like a barbell class. You're coaching people, through like the main barbell lifts and stuff. And right now they're programmed, it's some like tempo bench sets, and the fourth set is just an AMRAP. Just like let them have some fun with an AMRAP. And for every single person there, they'll go to rack it. They'll have like an easy rep and they'll go to rack it, and I'll just push the bar back out and be like, nope, we're still going. Come on. And every single person has gotten 3 to 5 more every time. And it's they undershoot all the time. There's people who aren't used to like truly pushing into, a certain level of fatigue or discomfort. Like to them, that felt like that was my last one, and they just need that little extra boost, and it's a really cool thing to watch people learn how to do though.
Yeah. And sometimes if people can't push like that, I try and get them with a group of other people so they can see, like, oh shit, I'm really not doing anything.
That's like I squat with a group on Saturdays, and usually when like someone wants to join in with us, a new person wants to join in and squat with us, it's real fun. So everybody's around that person squatting, and depending on what their program, sometimes like they'll be squatting and they'll go to rack and be like, oh come on, you got one more, and then oh you got one more, and they like over time learn like, oh I can push myself, or oh you can go up on the next set or whatever. And it's really fun to watch. And now those people are the ones who are doing that for others.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I don't train anymore with training partners on a regular basis because I train at home. But I remember one training partner I had, I would do something and I'd be damn near dead. And he'd be like, you got 5 more. And I'm like, screw you, man. So it's like, that was the best I got. So it is funny when you get around people, it's nice to have that camaraderie. It's nice to have the peer pressure. And then it's also nice to have someone in the group who understands, like, when is enough for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's always that person who's like, let's do 20 more pounds. You're like, that looked horrible. We really.
You just got to get your mind right.
Yeah. You can't live every day YOLO.
Fantastic. I was curious for each of you, this is actually for my enjoyment. If you think back in the history of your training, there's probably going to be a handful of highlights to where something pushed you and stretched you, and you were like, holy crap, that was something that for me really taught me what I had in, and like a whole new level of like pain intensity and pushing myself. Can each of you share like one story of maybe an example like that?
Well, yeah, CrossFit. Yeah, I remember training for regionals as an individual. Gosh, I didn't work at the time. My kids were little. I worked out for 8 hours, probably a day, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. You can ask Devin, I would cry because everything hurt so bad. It was horrific. But I mean, as far as strength training, I would say like when I worked out with you at Brutal Iron, gosh, I mean, I would say if you say do that, I would have been like, nope, there's no chance I can do it. And I did.
We had some fun sessions, especially whenever we were getting into like the bodybuilding type stuff too.
I don't know if I have any like one instance, I've always kind of been a little pushy with myself. I usually need pulled back. I will say, like, mindset wise though, I think like I can be a little bit of a head case sometimes, like in my own head a little bit with certain things. I was hitting, and Rob, you could probably remember this. I was hitting a little bit of a plateau with my deadlift. I was kind of stuck right around like 635 for like the longest time. And it didn't matter if it was kilos, pounds, stiff bar, deadlift, it didn't matter. I was just like stuck. I couldn't do more. I was getting so frustrated. And I don't remember what we did, but we pulled back for a little bit. We ended up pushing squat and like really pulling back on my deadlift, which made me really mad.
Yeah.
Like, just like, no, I want to go pick it up. And then we came back to it, and he immediately jumped into like, it was just like light singles working up. And the first block was just, I had to hit up to 635 by the 4th week. And I smoked it. I was like, okay, sweet. So my confidence went up because we had like that slow progression. We backed away from it. And then we went through another block, and I ended up missing the lift. And he just like wrote in heavier weights anyway the next week. He was like, it's fine. Just do it again. Like, next week you'll come back, you'll be fine. You missed it because you just weren't ready for it. And I think that was like one of the best things for me, because I was like, oh, like he knows I can hit this weight, so I gotta like, I have to be able to hit this weight then. And I think it was that block or the block after that, I ended up pulling, it was like 650 for the first time, and then the one after that it was 675 for the first time.
Yeah, I think Rob really likes to push me with the legs, and I really like to push them heavy. Something this past summer, the gym I list at is basically an old warehouse, and it's painted black. And in the summer, you know, in the Carolinas, it was pushing high 90s. But he had given me paused hack squats. I think they were supersetted with lunges or something. And oh my God, I nearly passed out after the first set. I mean, it was brutal. But honestly, getting through all 3 sets after the first set feeling so bad really kind of taught me what I can do, how hard I can push, and you'll get through it. It's worth it for the results you'll get. You know, if my goal is to increase my squat, other things need to suck. I need to go put all of my effort into those hack squats, even if it's going to be the death of me, because that's what's going to make me better.
Hell yeah.
But also, just really, I don't know. I feel like another one are rack pulls. I love rack pulls. And when you load them up, you put bands on there. I mean, the only solution is I have no better way to put it, but grow a pair of nuts and get the weight up. And that really just instills a drive in you. And I feel like builds that mindset of just push harder. If the weight's going to get up, and you unlock like a new level of effort at a certain point. You know what I mean? So yeah, really just pushing these super hard effort involved movements, I think, is what made me better, push me, and aim for that same feeling every time I do accessory sort of movements.
Oh, heck yeah. Heck yeah. Yo, this Jagoff here, he programmed one time. He programmed pause front squats. It was sets of 8 to 10, superset with low hand or prowler pushes. I had a timed 90-second rest between them, and it was like 4 rounds. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And then another time, you're talking about 1.5 squats, Bryce. I think it was 4 working sets of like 5, and then it was just a failure set with the same weight.
Yeah. Oh, he put that for me one time, and I was like, how am I supposed to do a failure set when I can only do 4? How many does he think I'm going to get?
Dude, I just collect people from the gym. I was like, all right, I need one of you on either side, one of you behind me, because I'm either not going to stand up or I'm going to pass out. It's going to be one of these two, because I'm not letting him win. I get so mad. I'm like, no.
That's
You
awesome.
did 4 sets of 5, and now I have to do as many as I can.
Yeah. I'm barely going to get 5.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I always try to like match what I did the first week, because then I feel like Rob wins if I don't.
I never looked at it that way. Like, he's going to win if I don't.
It's every time I'm just like, I can't let Rob win. Just like I refuse to throw up if I ever get like, if there's something ever going on, I'm like, Rob wins if I puke.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you. I think it's fun for people to hear that they'll survive. Like if you get into some misery and some pain, it's a part of the process to become your best self. You have to kill your old self. And that's not an easy process.
So I got like another kind of fun question,
Yeah.
or two kind of fun questions for people. I'll just start with this one. As like, since everybody here is a coach, like what being a coach, like what's the biggest lesson you've learned or taken from being a coach and working with people?
I'll go first. And for me, what I learned, this is going to be hilarious based on the stories we just had, but what I learned was kindness. Because to myself, I am not very kind. And that has helped me more than it's ever hurt me because it's helped me get where I am today. And learning that although that worked for me, and my parents taught me, like my dad, if I did something wrong, he's like, well, that was pretty stupid. You probably don't want to do that again. And I'm like, yep, okay, fair enough. So it was like tough love. And that's the language that my parents used. So therefore, I'm sure it influenced the language I used with myself. So when I was the skinny fat kid at 165 pounds with more body fat than I have now at 265, what drove me to change and grow was that I hated where I was more than I was scared of what I had to do to get something else different. So that drive motivated me, moved me, and got me to a lot better place. And it involved me, telling myself I'm a fat piece of shit and like a whole bunch of other language and just pushing all the time. And when I started coaching other people to recognize where's their mental limit, let me get them to that, but not expecting what mine was of each person, or not expecting people to want it as badly as I do. I remember when I was younger, I used to tell my parents all the time, like I want this more than they do, and I tell them that all the time. And I'm sure you all feel the same. Just learning to meet people where they are, talk to them the way that is an internal dialogue that works best for them. So being kind and keeping the person in mind rather than just, here's a project, here's a goal I want to meet.
Yeah, I think that's like the hardest thing for me. Like, had to come to realization that everyone's not psycho like I am. And they may not want to be on the world team. They might not want to do all that. Like, they just want to be in the gym and talk to people. So that was like one of the hardest things that I had to learn, especially when owning a gym. Like, some people, yeah, they don't want to be here to lose weight. Like, that's not even what they want or are here to do. Like, they just want to talk. And like, especially for the powerlifters, everyone has ways of encouragement and what they respond to, like you were saying. But yeah, I think just seeing that everyone may not be there for the same reason.
I think for me, biggest thing I've learned is you've got to be your client's number one fan. Lifting is as mental as it is physical, and you're the person leading them. You're giving them the path to get stronger, to become a better lifter. And I found every successful lifter has had a very supportive coach. I've seen plenty of bad coaches talk down on their lifters, and those lifters either don't progress or they leave. So that's something I've found, and I think it's made me a more compassionate and understanding person just in life, being through my lifters' perspectives and being their biggest fan. That's just another motivator and pushes them further, and also kind of helps me look at myself in a more positive light too. We were talking about, talking down on yourself to give you some drives. I found that doesn't help me. I've got to be as supportive as I can to myself to become better. Otherwise, I get too deep into it and it becomes, a anxiety sort of problem for me. So anyway, that's kind of what I've learned is you need to be the number one point of contact for that lifter because you are their source to getting better.
For me, it's I always thought I was good at meeting people where they are until you really start working with a lot of people and you whether it's physical therapy or training clients, like, you don't know all the stuff that affects like that's just such a small portion of their day-to-day life. Understanding like how to meet them where they are, what their actual goals are, like what's going on, and also realizing too, like, you're the expert in a very small niche amount of knowledge, but you're not the expert on their body like they are. And so if you can understand that what they're telling you is how they feel and what's really going on, and then meeting them where they're at, like, I think that's been one of the greatest experiences that I've been able to have, and like learning how to work with people is a combination of kind of that.
Yeah, there's a lot more learning to do than you think when you become a coach. It goes way beyond just the programming. You have to learn that person and their life experiences, what they're going through, sources of stress. I mean, I'm coaching a dude who has 5 kids. I don't have a kid. There's things he's going through I just don't quite get. And so I try to learn and talk with him and to help him out. And that will help me out as a coach if I come across somebody else like that. So, yeah, a lot of unique things to learn as a coach beyond just the exercise science part of it.
I think it's also so helpful to not be afraid, like to be confident enough in yourself to ask other professionals for help, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's really sad when you see coaches who like refuse to ask other people to help their client or help them help their client or something, right? Like, if I don't know how to do something, I'm going to ask somebody else who I think understands, like, hey, do you know, like, I'm stuck on this. Can you help me with this? And if they can, they'll either help me help that person, or that person can go see them, and that's okay. But like, that makes me more credible to the client because I sent them to a professional, but also like helps me like become a better coach or clinician anyway.
Like when I got my corrective exercise specialist like certification, it came from me basically overtraining myself and accumulating some soft tissue like annoyances, and I was getting frustrated trying to figure out what was going on. So I bought like, oh my gosh, I bought so many books, like all these books about trigger point therapies and dry needling and a whole bunch of things. I then paid to go to a sports physical therapist guy up in Charlotte who did a lot of dry needling for me. I saw when we were in his office, I said, oh man, you have like a lot of textbooks around. And I said, do you mind if I take a photo? So I took a photo of his college textbooks and then bought them all on Amazon and started reading through them. And then while I was learning, any client I had who had like some kind of tissue issue that they were struggling with, I would send them to him, to that doctor, physical therapist. And that became like a wonderful relationship because, like you said, the clients I was working with who I referred, they then trusted me more and found more value in me as a coach because I cared about them as a person more than anything. And then also by me reading all the books and going to see the person on my own, I then learned a lot to be able to manage on my own in the gym more for my own self. And I think being able to tap into other people and not being afraid to accept that you don't know everything is very helpful for continuing to develop yourself.
Right. And especially since my background is engineering. It's nothing related to fitness. I thought I could get through just doing my own self-research because when I get really into a hobby, I could research stuff for days and think I know it all. But theory is maybe not even half of what we do. At a certain point, you have to try things out. You have to speak with other professionals. Like I really like to talk to other bodybuilding coaches that I know about assistance movements that I program to learn more about them, how to apply them. But just a quick example of what I'm talking about there.
Yeah, I've had some amazing coaches come through the gym here, thankfully. And, I have sat down with each and every one of them countless times and just picked their brain, like always trying to learn, like, because they all do things differently. They all view things a little differently. So it's been a really great learning experience for me as a coach and a clinician to like pull from all the minds of all these different strength coaches and like what they've read and who they've learned from. And it's made me so much better at my job, just understanding that stuff.
Anybody have any other topics you want to cover or anything?
I was thinking we could talk about the mental aspect of competing in strength sports. I just had a few keywords and we can kind of branch off of them, whatever you kind of wanted to talk about. Um, so I'm just going to spit these words out. And if y'all want to give me an opinion or how you apply these with yourself or with your clients, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So manifestation, visualization, and overcuing. Those are kind of the big three I've been thinking about recently. So if anybody wants to take off of that, I'll pick up after.
So I can start if you want. I think visualization is huge. I think, like I tell all of my clients, no matter what we're working on, like you got to visualize yourself being successful at whatever it is we're doing. Because the process of working through something or working towards a goal, if you're visualizing it and executing the plan to work up to it, like it's going to manifest itself, right? The likelihood of that manifesting itself, it's going to happen. You talk about over queuing. I think I was like starting off as like a coach and a PT. You think you know everything, and then you don't because you over queue everybody. You're telling them everything under the sun, like how to squat and how to do this stuff, instead of like just giving them one simple thing to work on. Let them become an expert at that one part of the movement before you queue into something else. So when I think over queuing, I think it's just trying to get everybody really good at the one thing, every aspect of it at once, instead of just like, okay, the most important thing that you need to work on is this. So just do this. And once you're really good at this, then maybe we'll fix this part of the movement. But you're not going to kill yourself by like moving that ugly right now. It's just like, let's make it a little prettier or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's hard for newer lifters to do the visualization because they can't even see themselves doing it. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that part is hard, like with newer lifters. Yeah, with older lifters, for sure, that I did a whole counseling session like a long time ago when I was at Muscle Driver. They made us do counseling for, mental lifting and stuff because we were all so crazy. But the only thing that I only ever remember is them telling me say like three confident words to yourself before you go lift. Like, so mine was always like strength, power. What was the other one? It's two S's and a P because it was SSP. Now I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, like with new lifters too, like I only tell them one thing, like try and keep all your weight in your heels and focus on that, or keep your back tight. But yeah, I think it's hard to visualize things.
Yeah, I see, like on two parts. It's hard for people to visualize if they've never had success in their life.
Right.
A lot of people, since I've gotten to work with people who are, you're trying to teach them the difference between a barbell and a dumbbell, all the way to people who are, professional athletes. For the newer crowd, they've never been successful at anything, and the most successful thing they did was the stepping foot of the gym. And that was the scariest thing they've ever done in their life. So for some of them, the concept of like manifesting their destiny and or visualizing it gets too foreign for them. They just relate to it. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but they like for them it wouldn't really mean anything. There would be no connection to it.
Right.
And then queuing, the way that I would ideally like to approach it, I'm not saying I always do, is I like to explain why something is important, but then distill it down to like one phrase or a couple keywords. But what I found when I was younger in my career is I would tell them what I wanted them to do, like, hey, next time lean a little bit more in your heels. But I wouldn't explain why because I didn't want it to be overwhelming. Well, what I found is when I started to teach them the why, they would do the cue faster because it meant more to them as to why it was so damn important and why I kept repeating it all the time. So I wasn't weighing the crap out of them for no reason. It was because if you do that, then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And we want all those things to happen, but we're never going to get to the fifth thing unless we get the fourth thing, unless we get the third, unless we get the second thing, unless we get the first. So this first thing, just push a little bit more through your heels. So I like to explain why it matters, but then come back to something that they can use as a very concise concept and not have to remember the whole big freaking story of why it was important.
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to bring this up, because as I mentioned a little bit before, I've got a little bit of anxiety going into my lifts, especially on heavy lifts, And that kind of kills you when you're doing powerlifting, which is a 1 rep. You got one chance at that. Well, I mean, you got 3 chances really, but one chance to get a PR most of the time. And if you're in your head, then that weight is not gonna go where you want it to, you know? So something I've been thinking about a lot recently is manifestation and visualization. You have to tell yourself that you're going to complete that lift. You have to see yourself doing it. Otherwise it won't happen. Like I think you can tell yourself it's going to happen. You can not think about it at all, or you can be on the negative side of things and say, this probably won't go well. This is really heavy. I might only get this for 1 rep. And that's the worst way to approach it. I feel like the mental side of things is not looked at as strongly as it should by especially newer lifters and newer coaches. Like I said earlier, lifting is as mental as it is physical. So if you can approach the bar with the right mindset, then that sets you up for success. And so going into overcueing a little bit, that's something that also kind of killed me when I started out. And when I was programming myself, I would watch all these different YouTube videos about the perfect form for deadlift. And everybody would say something different for how to get your lats tight, how to set your hips into the bar. And trying all these different things really made my technique worse. And I think at a certain point, I'm not a huge fan of the phrase shut up and lift, but I think you kind of need to try one thing at a time and see what sticks at a certain point. So now I do approach my lifters 1 cue at a time. Otherwise, it is overwhelming and anxiety inducing. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that. I'm now interested in regards to the mental side, the arousal curve. How do y'all get to that peak point of arousal when you're approaching the bar? Or how do you help your clients get to that point? And what do you do from going too far, getting overstimulated?
I think one thing that comes to my mind is fun. Everyone's different comes to them in the right mind state. So Lauren, I've helped you and your husband Devin. Now, Devin, he's ready to stab somebody to get to the bar, and he is ready to murder stuff, super intense. You don't have to tell him anything. You're basically just trying to get out of his way. He is ready to keep you late. So what I found with people like Devin, and I actually fall kind of into that category, is I'm excited. When I get to the powerlifting meet and I get to my second or my third attempt, I think I think it might have been you, Bryce. When I'm at a powerlifting meet, I don't even warm. I don't even care if I warm up. I'm just so fired up and so intense. The last meet I did for deadlift, to warm up, I just did 405 once, and then I went out and did a 660 deadlift or something. Because I was so intense and excited, and I get so revved up that there's not a feeling of what if I don't get it? I'm I can't even tell you that I think about whether I get it or not get it. I'm just this is it. This is the time. It's about and I'm just so fired up and I'm so ready to go. But then there are clients to where they are as nervous as you can possibly get. So it's a soft voice. It's a slow cadence. It's saying, hey, let's just remember our cues. We've done this before in the gym. We're going to do our best today. If it turns out well, it does. If it doesn't, we'll do another meet in a month or two. So it can be anywhere in between there, and then trying to figure out what works best for that person. So one more quick story is I remember I had this one client who, trying to think how to word it properly and nicely, is she was very nervous, but she wouldn't admit that she was nervous. She didn't like admitting that she didn't have control over herself. She was listening. She walked away and I turned the music on. She looked back at me and said, "You'll be fine." And that was all I said to her. And she got so mad. But what happened was that was the first attempt. She came back and she's like, "Well, I screwed that up. I didn't have my music on. It was in my head." And I said, "Well, what did you mess up?" She's like, "Well, I lined up too close to the bar." And I said, "Well, just don't do that next time." So again, she was like, "Well, of course." And I said, "That's all you gotta think of. Literally, the only thing in your head is stand a little bit further away from the bar." She goes out, she hits the second one. It's a lot smoother because she stood further away from the bar. And then she went out the third one. I don't remember if she got it or not. But after the meet, she was asking me, she goes, why would you do that? And I said, to be honest, you're using it as a crutch. And you're never going to be stronger than your crutch. So maybe it wasn't the best approach. Maybe you're mad.
Maybe not the right time to do that.
I telling her, I said, I care more about you being strong as a person than as a lifter. And if you're using this crutch in lifting, you're likely using other crutches in life. So take a week or two. If you're mad at me and you don't want to work together anymore, I understand. But I think it'd be better for you to just approach those things and just confront them head on. She texted me the next day and said that she wanted to work together, and she sent me a date for me, and we continued to work together. But that was an example where there's a balance of you have to meet people where they are. So if somebody's aggressive, be aggressive with him. If somebody needs you to be soft and kind, do that. But if somebody's using your crutch, don't be afraid to poke at them a little bit. It's basically trying to figure out, how do I help this person be their best self? And whatever the answer is, you do that.
Yeah, I used to get all riled up to go lift, but it was really just like a mask for nervousness or anxiety of all the pressure that's there. You just got to do it this one time. This is your only chance to do it, kind of a deal. So I'd get all jacked up, but it wasn't real. It's just almost like you're pretending to be all excited to go. So the more I've, trained and then also been around experienced lifters and stuff and just kind of learned how, what that actually looks like and how to dial it back for myself. I'd say anymore, I've learned that I lift very calm for the majority of my training. And even when I'm at a meet, and I can, my nervous system will only let me get excited for one lift, and then I'm flagged, legitimate, adrenaline rush. And then if that happens on a squat, I'm probably going to miss my second attempt,
Yeah.
And then deadlift is going to be rough. So I usually when I train squats and stuff, I'm pretty calm unless I have to hit something really heavy, or even bench press. I'm pretty calm unless I have one really heavy set. And then same thing with deadlift. I try to keep it pretty low key because it allows me to just think it through, just be confident, know I have I'm just going to pick it up or stand up with it or whatever it is. And then the more I do that, I find that when I can actually let myself get excited, there's no fear of failing at that point. It's just okay, yeah, this is going to be sweet.
Yeah.
I don't know what I do anymore. I don't. I really don't. But I think same, I've become calmer. Even when I deadlifted the other day, they're everyone that was with me, they're you just hit that? And I was yeah. And they're oh, you weren't all amped up. I'm oh, I don't know. I mean, I still get nervous at meets, but I think I settle down after the first squat. But
I found that controlled aggression is how I like to approach my lifts. I kind of learned this from Joe Sullivan. He's a all-time world record squatter. He's a super smart dude. I think you should be approaching the bar as calmly as you can, and that'll allow you to be focused and not overexcited. I was talking about that arousal curve. Once you fall off the end, you're falling off the end.
Mm.
I don't think there's any way to really pull yourself back at that point. And especially at a meet, I think that's especially bad. Kind of like Jared says, that happens on your first squat and you're too excited. It's just not a good sign for the rest of the meet. So control aggression is what I really like to use for myself and my clients. Go into the lift, calm, controlled, collected. And as soon as it's time to lock in and actually start that lift, that's when you really start to turn it on. Because you can't get overexcited if the bar is already on your back, already in your hands, if you're already wedged into your deadlift. At that point, you're lifting the weight. Nothing can stop you at that point. And I also feel like if you go into excited, you're expending energy, mental and physical energy, getting too tight, getting, too nervous, too overstimulated. Yeah, that's kind of how I like to treat the arousal curve and getting excited for a lift.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had guys that come out and they're just way too excited. They missed the lifts, even though they hit way more than that in training. We peaked well, and it just sucks,
As powerlifters, we can't afford to waste our energy. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I think something that helps is attempt selection. This might not solve all problems, but it's something to consider is if somebody does struggle with arousal control and say they like it's more on the nervousness side, then I think undershooting their squat opener is great because it just gives them a chance to get a lift in, to count it, and they know they're in the meet. So being very cautious on the opener for the squats, I think is a really good opportunity to where you can match what someone needs. So super nervous person, let them start with something they can do for like 5 reps. Just let them get something in that counts. Take a bigger jump on the second, bigger on the third if you can. If you have somebody who gets like super excited, maybe, being a little more aggressive on the first might be okay. But I think modifying the first attempts is a really good way to match what the client needs. And too often what I've seen in younger coaches, like when I have interns from the university, is they come in with this formula, like has to be 92.5% is the opener and then 97, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but what does it feel like? If you say that number to yourself, what do you feel nervous about that? Do you feel excited about that? Do you like, is it easy? So having an idea of where attempts might, should be in percentages, but being willing to modify that, I think, is extremely helpful to match what a client needs arousal-wise.
Yeah, I think it's been helpful. Like, it's been fun working with you, Rob, and like as I've grown as a lifter, like working through like what attempt selections look like, and like it is every time you'll be like, this is what I was thinking. How does this make you feel? You don't ask me what I like think about it. You're like, how does this make you feel? And it gives me the space to just be honest and be like, well, I don't know if I like that for my first. I'm like, oh, that's too easy. Like, we got to go up for this one or whatever. And I kind of like how you work. It's just an easy switch in words, but I like how you do that because it, instead of like, what do you think about this? You give me the space to like tell you like what I actually feel about it.
Yeah, that's fun to hear. Yeah. And then we're probably going to wrap up here pretty soon. But one thing I wanted to touch on, if people are listening to this for strength-based training, the coach part of me, like the parental part of me, would be mad if I missed it. So I want to touch on is as coaches and as dads, you can touch on it at a surface level or micro level, however you want to, but what do you think is the relationship or the importance of nutrition when it comes to how you progress in training and or how strong you can be? How important is nutrition to the process of strength training?
Gosh, like how far in too deep do you want to get to this? Because, I think it's 100% relatable. You can't do 10% of one and expect 100% in the other.
Yes, I just want them to hear it from someone else.
I think nutrition is how you do everything. I mean, that's how your body heals.
Yeah, it's like your gas in your gas tank.
Yeah, it's everything. I don't think I go a single day with any client without talking to them a little bit about like, or at least asking like, okay, what's your nutrition look like? That way I know, like, I don't necessarily give nutrition advice, right? Like, that's not my job or my specialty, but I know basics enough to like at least look at things and be like, okay, here's this, but then also be able to like point them in the right direction if they do need some help, because nobody's going to get stronger or meet their goals or get, better or out of pain or something if they don't have those things dialed in.
Yeah, nutrition is extremely, extremely important. It's something I've kind of evolved with as I've been working with Rob. Before I started working with him, all I really looked at was macros. So, the 1 gram per pound for protein, that sort of stuff. And over time, I started to realize, the importance of timing your macros, especially carbs, the quality of the food you're actually eating. Macros it's not just if it fits your macros. That's a good way to start, but that's not how you keep it going long term, in my opinion. Keeping up with your digestion and making sure the foods you're eating actually, pass through, you absorb what you need to, they come out good, I guess is a way to put it too. And also I think, staying away from these fad diets is a big thing to pay attention to as well. But the big one right now, of course, are these low carb, animal based diets, carnivore diet, whatever else. And I see lifters trying to adopt these sort of fad diets, not understanding the benefits of a normal balanced diet, and their lifts suffer. And I just don't understand what people, why people advertise or these things. I just don't get it. But it's something I've, all of these different factors are things I've been experimenting with just by myself, seeing what affects my lifts the most, what hurts my lifting on a particular day. Should I be front loading my fat for breakfast if I'm training at 3 p.m., when to have, high GI versus low GI carbs, fiber intake, what point of the day. I mean, it's crazy how much detail you can get into with the diet stuff. And, every little factor will affect your lifting in some sense, even on rest days. What you eat for dinner the night before could affect your lifts the next day. So yeah, I think there's a lot to get into. I think it's also important just generally for health to pay attention to stuff like micros, your vitamins, your fiber, your minerals, everything, because that affects your health, and how healthy you are, affects your potential to get stronger in the gym. So it's not just fuel for your workout, it's fuel for life, and lifting is part of your life. So that's kind of how I approach it. And with my clients, I at least like to cover the macros and the macro timing and some other important micros, at least to me, like fiber, vitamin C, vitamin D. And from there, I think really it comes down to trial and error. I think you have to try new things and see what sticks, what helps you the most with your workouts.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of personalization to it and being willing to experiment, but then also knowing what order to experiment in, like what's important before something else is important. But I just wanted people to know from someone other than me and from other coaches and lifters that nutrition is definitely something we all consider and pay attention to. So a lot of times when it comes to strength discussions, like just say overall holistic discussions about strength training, people will argue the nuances of, a Hatfield squat versus a front squat. But at the same time, as you'd ask them, like, how many calories you eat today, and they have no clue. And it's like, oh, my God. So I think that it's important to have nutrition accounted for, and that it is a part of the process. I think is helpful for people to know. So if you guys are up to doing this again sometime, maybe we'll do like a nutrition-based one as well.
Heck yeah.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
Okay. I figure what we can do to wrap this up is I'd like to have each of you, if you don't mind, just share a way in which people could reach out and connect to you, whether that's, Instagram, social media, website, whatever it might be. So, Lauren, how would people reach out to you?
My Instagram handle is rutan422. My email is also rutan422@gmail.com.
Awesome.
You can find me on my website, functionreforge.com, Instagram @functionreforge, or if you want to see what Rob and I do training together, it's @PTN Powerlifting. And if you want to shoot me an email about anything, it's just jared@functionreforge.com.
Awesome. Bryce?
You can find me on Instagram @JVCJacked. It's probably the best place to reach me. But I also moderate and help out in a Discord server. I think it's the second largest, called Effective Fitness. So if that's something you're interested in, I will be there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, they're listening to this podcast. They know how to find me. So that works. Yes. Well, I thank everybody for being here. I appreciate your time. So we'll wrap this up. And if anybody has any questions, reach out to everything they said and they'll get back to you. Okay. Thank you for listening.